Commander Vex-Talar of the Galactic Security Council had seen many things in his 400 rotations of service. Wars that scorched entire star systems, plagues that consumed civilizations, pirates that made grown Xylonians weep for their shell mothers. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared him for the report sitting on his biopad this morning. A human colony, he muttered, his three eyes blinking in disbelief. On Kepler 442b? His aide, a nervous little Flixian named Keeb, nodded so rapidly his head tentacles started to blur. Yes, sir. Confirmed by our long-range sensors. Population estimate. Well, sir, you're not going to like this. Vex-Talar's mandibles clicked ominously. In the galactic community, that sound was universally recognized as someone is about to have a very bad day. Tell me, Keeb, and please, try not to faint this time. 12,000, sir. 12,000 humans. And, sir, they've been there for 3 standard cycles without anyone noticing. The biopad slipped from Vex-Talar's primary manipulator and clattered onto the deck. 3 cycles. 3 cycles. Do you know what most species accomplish in 3 cycles? The Garothians managed to build a nice shed. The Valtex might successfully organize a committee to discuss maybe starting a small garden. But humans? Oh no. Humans had apparently decided to turn a barren rock into what the preliminary scans were calling, and I quote, a thriving agricultural and industrial center with defensive capabilities that make our best military installations look like children's toys. Sir, Keb's voice squeaked higher. Should I alert the council? Vex-Talar slowly picked up his biopad, scrolling through the sensor data. Fusion reactors, check. Atmospheric processors, check. Orbital defense platforms that weren't there yesterday but somehow looked like they'd been there for decades. Double check with a side of how in the 7 hells. Kaib, he said carefully, get me Admiral Xerion. And Kaib, tell him to bring his anxiety medication, he's going to need it. The holographic form of Admiral Xerion materialized in the command center 20 minutes later, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else in the galaxy, which, considering what they were about to discuss, was probably accurate. So, the Admiral said without preamble, his scaled hide already shifting to a pale yellow color of stress. Humans, again, what delightful surprise have they prepared for us this time? Vex-Talar activated the main display, and the room filled with 3-dimensional images of Kepler 442b. What had once been a lifeless chunk of rock now pulsed with activity. Cities that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. Massive agricultural domes that stretched beyond the horizon. And those defense platforms. Sweet merciful void, Admiral Xerion whispered, his hide now cycling rapidly through colors that didn't exist in any known species' emotional spectrum. Are those 64 of them? Vex-Talar confirmed. Each one capable of dropping a tungsten rod with the force of a small nuclear weapon. And Admiral? They're all aimed at hyperspace jump points. The silence in the room could have been vacuum sealed and sold as a premium product. Finally, Admiral Xerion found his voice. How? How did they build all this so quickly? And that, dear listeners, was the 12 million credit question. Because while the rest of the galactic community was still arguing about zoning permits and environmental impact studies, the humans had somehow managed to terraform an entire planet, establish a thriving colony, and build enough military hardware to make the Galactic Defense Force look like they were carrying slingshots. The preliminary reports suggest they used something called elbow grease and good old-fashioned human ingenuity, Vex-Talar read from his notes, neither of which appear in any of our databases. Of course they don't, the Admiral muttered. Probably classified human weapons technology. What's their colony leader's name? Vex-Talar checked his files. Maya Okafor, former terraforming engineer. Age 32 standard rotations. 32? Admiral Xerion's voice rose an octave. They put a 32 rotation old in charge of 12,000 colonists and enough firepower to level a moon? Apparently she volunteered for the position after the previous administrator was voted out for inefficiency. Both officers stared at each other. In galactic politics, voted out usually meant centuries of bureaucratic procedures, appeals courts, and enough paperwork to deforest a small planet. But humans apparently just looked at someone and said, nope, you're done. Maya's in charge now. Anyone got a problem with that? Sir Keeb interrupted from his workstation, his tentacles practically vibrating with anxiety. We're receiving a transmission from the colony. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a human female with dark skin, bright eyes, and an expression that somehow managed to be both friendly and terrifying. She was standing in what appeared to be some sort of command center, with displays showing real-time data from across the planet. Hello there, Maya Okafor said cheerfully. waving at the camera. "I'm guessing you folks just noticed we were here. Surprise." Vex-Talar exchanged glances with Admiral Vex-Talar. In his long career, he'd received many types of first-contact communications, formal declarations, diplomatic overtures, threats of annihilation, but never had anyone opened with surprise while standing in front of enough monitoring equipment to coordinate the defense of an entire star system. "Greetings," Vex-Talar managed. "I am Commander Vex-Talar of the Galactic Security Council. We were unaware of your colony's establishment." Maya's grin widened. "Oh, we filed all the proper paperwork. Form 27B for colonial establishment. Form 15C for terraforming permits. Form 98X for, well, let's just say we're fully legal. I can send you copies if you'd like." That's not possible," Admiral Vex-Talar interjected. "Colonial permits require approval from 17 different committees, environmental assessments from 12 agencies, and a minimum processing time of 47 standard rotations." "Oh, that," Maya said, still smiling. "Yeah, we kind of expedited the process a bit. Turns out when you submit all your paperwork simultaneously to every committee at once, copy all the agencies on every communication, and include detailed environmental impact reports that are actually accurate instead of politically motivated guesswork, well, things move a lot faster." Kira made a choking sound that might have been laughter or terror. Possibly both. You actually read the regulations?" Vex-Talar asked weakly. "Every single one. All 47,000 pages. Took our legal team about 2 weeks. Great bedtime reading, by the way. Very thorough. Possibly too thorough. But hey, that's bureaucracy for you." The human had a legal team that read 47,000 pages of galactic regulations in 2 weeks. For fun, as bedtime reading. Vex-Talar felt one of his stomachs starting to cramp. "And the orbital defense platforms?" Admiral Vex-Talar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, those." Maya turned to gesture at one of her displays. Form 156J, Defensive Installations for Colonial Protection. Subsection 12 clearly states that colonies in frontier space are permitted to establish reasonable defensive measures. We figured 64 kinetic bombardment satellites qualified as reasonable. 64 orbital weapons platforms is reasonable? The Admiral squeaked. "Well, we originally planned for 128, but our accountant said that might be showing off. We're very budget conscious, you know. These things aren't cheap." In the background of Maya's transmission, other humans could be seen going about their daily business. Children playing in parks that had been carved from solid rock. Adults working in laboratories that looked more advanced than some entire world's scientific facilities. Engineers casually maintaining fusion reactors like they were tending garden flowers. "How?" Vex-Talar finally asked. "How did you accomplish all this in 3 standard rotations?" Maya's expression grew thoughtful. "Well, it helps that we didn't spend 2.5 rotations arguing about whether the project was feasible. We just did it. Turns out when you skip the committee meetings and actually work on the problem, things happen pretty quickly." She gestured to someone off camera, and a moment later another human appeared in the frame. Male, older, with graying hair and hands that looked like they'd built half the colony personally. "This is Tom Bradley, our chief engineer," Maya said. "Tom, why don't you explain our construction timeline to these gentlemen?" Tom nodded politely. "Well, sirs, it's really quite simple. We started with the essential infrastructure, power generation, life support, basic manufacturing. Once you have those 3 things up and running, everything else just sort of follows naturally." "Just follows naturally?" Admiral Vex-Talar repeated. "Sure. Need housing? Build a construction facility and start printing habitat modules. Need food? Set up atmospheric processors and agricultural domes. Need defense? Well, once you have manufacturing and power, orbital platforms are just engineering problems." Tom said this like he was describing how to make breakfast. Just add orbital weapons platforms to taste. "The key," Maya added helpfully, "is parallel processing. While Tom's team was building infrastructure, our agricultural specialists were soil testing and crop planning. Our defense team was designing the orbital grid. Our communications people were setting up the sensor network. Everyone working on their piece of the puzzle at the same time." Vex-Talar felt his worldview cracking like an egg. But the regulations require sequential approval phases, infrastructure approval before construction permits, construction completion before agricultural licensing, agricultural establishment before defensive installations. "Oh, we did all that," Maya said. "We just did it efficiently." Turns out most of those sequential requirements are suggestions, not laws. As long as you meet all the safety standards and environmental requirements, the timing is surprisingly flexible. There was a pause as this information sank in. The galactic bureaucracy, which had spent millennia perfecting the art of making simple tasks impossibly complicated, had apparently been circumvented by a species that simply read the rules and followed them correctly. "Commander," Kibor whispered urgently, "we're receiving priority communications from 17 different council members. They're all asking about the humans." Vex-Talar closed his eyes. "All 3 of them? What kind of asking?" "The panic kind, sir. Apparently several other human colonies have just appeared in systems that were supposedly uninhabited, and sir, they all filed proper paperwork." On the screen, Maya was still smiling that terrifyingly cheerful smile. "Oh, did our sister colonies check in? That's wonderful. We're part of a coordinated settlement initiative, you see. 17 colonies across 12 sectors, all perfectly legal, all fully documented, all absolutely committed to being good galactic citizens. 17 colonies, 12 sectors. All of them apparently built with the same terrifying efficiency that had turned a dead rock into a thriving world in 3 rotations. Now," Maya continued, "I'm sure you gentlemen are very busy, so I'll let you get back to your important work. But if you need anything, please don't hesitate to call. We're always happy to help." The transmission ended, leaving the command center in absolute silence. Finally, Admiral Zix spoke. "Keeb, get me the council. Emergency session. Priority Alpha." "Sir, what should I tell them the emergency is?" The Admiral looked at the now blank screen where Maya's smile had been moments before. Tell them we need to update our definition of reasonable defensive measures." As Keeb scurried away to send the message, Vex-Talar pulled up the Galactic Colonial Database. 17 human colonies, all legal, all documented, all absolutely impossible, by every conventional understanding of how colonization worked. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice was asking a very uncomfortable question. If humans could build 17 colonies this quickly, this efficiently, this competently, what else might they be capable of? He had a feeling they were about to find out. The biopad in his hands chimed with another incoming report. "New human colony detected. Kepler 438b. Population 15,000. Orbital defenses classified as robust. Time to establishment, 2 standard rotations." Vex-Talar set down the biopad very carefully and reached for his own anxiety medication. It was going to be a long day. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was, to put it mildly, a complete disaster. And that was before anyone mentioned the humans. Council Speaker Yeth-Kralar, a distinguished Vorthak whose purple scales had turned an alarming shade of orange with stress, called the session to order with what sounded suspiciously like a death rattle. Around the vast circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species sat in various states of panic, confusion, and what the humans would probably call existential dread. "Fellow council members," Speaker Yeth-Kralar began, his voice echoing through the chamber's bioacoustic enhancers, "we face an unprecedented situation. In the past 12 standard hours, we have confirmed the existence of 17 human colonies across 12 sectors, all established without our knowledge, all completely legal." The chamber erupted in what could charitably be called controlled hysteria. The Zolonian delegate's shell began rattling so violently it sounded like a percussion section. The Flixian representative's tentacles tied themselves in knots, and the less said about what the Garothian ambassador was doing with his breathing apparatus, the better. "How is that possible?" demanded Councillor Vex-Talar of the Altarian Union, his bioluminescent patches flashing angry reds and yellows. "Our Colonial Oversight Committee processes every application personally. We have procedures, we have protocols, we have 17 subcommittees just for environmental impact assessments." Commander Vex-Talar, who had been summoned to present his findings, stepped forward with all the enthusiasm of someone walking to their own execution. "With respect, Counselor, the humans apparently read all our procedures, every single one, and then followed them." The silence that followed this statement was so profound that several species who communicated through subsonic vibrations thought the universe had ended. "They followed our procedures?" Speaker Yeth-Kralar asked weakly. "All of them? Every regulation, every guideline, every subclause and addendum. They filed Form 27B for colonial establishment, Form 15C for terraforming permits, Form 98 DEX for defensive installations, and approximately 437 other required documents. Simultaneously, to all relevant departments." Councillor Vex-Talar's patches were now cycling through colors that didn't exist in most species' visual spectrum. But that's not how it's supposed to work. The bureaucratic process exists for a reason. It creates necessary delays that allow for proper consideration and debate. Apparently, Vex-Talar continued, consulting his biopad. The humans have a saying about this. Red tape is just suggestions written in a difficult font. I'm not entirely sure what that means, but their legal team seem to have taken it as a personal challenge. In the gallery reserved for observers, Admiral Vex-Talar watched the proceedings with the grim satisfaction of someone who knew things were about to get much worse. The biopad in his hands contained hourly updates from the surveillance teams now monitoring all known human colonies. The reports made for fascinating if terrifying reading. Colony 7 had established interstellar trade routes with 3 different species who hadn't even known humans existed. Colony 12 was offering technical assistance to a nearby Garothian settlement that had been struggling with atmospheric processors for 60 standard rotations. Colony 15 had apparently solved a mathematical theorem that had puzzled galactic scientists for 3 centuries, and they'd done it as a side project while building their waste management system. "The question before us," Speaker Xerion said, his voice barely above a whisper, "is what we do about this situation. These colonies are legal, they're established, they're thriving. And frankly, several of them are already more advanced than worlds that have been inhabited for millennia." The Altarian delegate stood up so quickly his hover seat nearly tipped over. "We investigate. We send inspection teams. We find violations and shut them down." This suggestion was met with what humans might recognize as nervous laughter from several other delegates. The Vorthak observer from Sector 7 had submitted a preliminary report that morning. The human colony in his region had not only passed every conceivable inspection with perfect scores, but had also identified 17 ways to improve the inspection process itself. They'd submitted these suggestions in triplicate, with detailed implementation timelines and cost-benefit analyses. "Perhaps," suggested the Flixian delegate, his tentacles untwisting slightly, "we should simply accept the situation. The humans appear to be model galactic citizens. Their colonies are self-sufficient, environmentally responsible, and they're actually contributing to galactic commerce and knowledge." The chamber fell silent again. Floss. The idea of simply accepting an efficient solution to a bureaucratic problem was so alien to most council members that several needed medical attention. "But the precedent," wailed the Garothian representative. "If word gets out that colonies can be established quickly and efficiently, other species might start demanding the same treatment. They might expect results instead of process. They might want their applications actually processed instead of filed in committees for decades." The true horror of the situation was beginning to dawn on everyone present. The humans hadn't just established colonies. They had proven that the entire galactic bureaucratic system was essentially an elaborate way of making simple tasks take as long as possible. And they'd done it by accident, simply by treating the regulations as actual instructions instead of ritualistic barriers. Admiral Vex-Talar's biopad chimed with another update. He glanced at it, and his scales immediately shifted to that alarming pale yellow that meant impending cardiac event. "Speaker Xerion," he called from the gallery. "Permission to address the council?" "Granted, Admiral. Please tell me you have good news." Vex-Talar stood up, his biopad clutched in his primary manipulator like a weapon. "I'm afraid not, sir. We've just received word from Colony 9 on Kepler 296e. They've made contact with the Xerion Syndicate." The chamber erupted in genuine panic this time. The Xerion Syndicate was notorious throughout the galaxy for being absolutely impossible to deal with. They had turned bureaucratic obstruction into an art form. Their simplest trade negotiations took decades. Their diplomatic protocols were so complex that most species gave up trying to understand them and just avoided Xerion space entirely. "What kind of contact?" Speaker Xerion asked, though his tone suggested he really didn't want to know. "They've established a comprehensive trade agreement, full commercial partnership, technology exchange protocols, and mutual defense pact." The silence that followed this announcement could have been bottled and sold as essence of stunned disbelief. "How long did these negotiations take?" whispered the Altarian delegate. Admiral Vex-Talar consulted his biopad. "According to the reports, 4 hours and 37 minutes. Somewhere in the chamber, a delegate fainted. Actually fainted. It might have been the Flixian, but it was hard to tell because 3 other species were now making distress noises that sounded remarkably similar. 4 hours? Speaker Xerion repeated numbly. "The humans negotiated a comprehensive agreement with the Xerion Syndicate in 4 hours." "Yes, sir." Apparently the human negotiator, a woman named Lisa Park, simply asked the Xerion representatives what they actually wanted instead of what they were willing to accept as a compromise. Then she offered them exactly that, with detailed implementation plans and projected timelines. The Xerion Syndicate representative, who had been sitting quietly in the observer section, stood up with what could only be described as religious awe. Honored council members, if I may, the human negotiator was refreshing. She had clearly read our cultural briefings. She understood our actual needs rather than our negotiating positions. She treated our time as valuable rather than infinite. It was efficient. Coming from a Xerion, the word efficient sounded like a prayer. And the Mutual Defense Pact? Asked Counselor Vex-Talar, though he looked like he'd rather be discussing anything else. The Xerion representative's expression grew thoughtful. The humans pointed out that their orbital defense platforms could provide early warning systems for our trade routes. In exchange, our patrol fleets would provide security for their exploration vessels. It's logical, efficient, practical. These were not words typically associated with galactic politics, and hearing them in the council chamber was like listening to someone speak a foreign language. Admiral Xixmoran's biopad chimed again. Then again. Then it started chiming continuously as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. "Speaker," he said, his voice climbing toward hysteria, "we have more updates. Colony 3 has established research partnerships with the Vorthak Science Academy. Colony 11 is providing disaster relief to a Gorothian settlement hit by stellar storms. Colony 16 has somehow resolved a territorial dispute between two minor species that we've been mediating for 37 rotations." "How did they resolve it?" Speaker Xerion asked weakly. "They asked both sides what they actually needed the disputed territory for, found out neither side really wanted the same parts of it, and suggested they simply divide it based on actual usage requirements rather than historical claims. The simplicity of it was devastating. Centuries of diplomatic tradition, committee hearings and bureaucratic process, circumvented by the radical approach of actually solving the problem. Honored Council, came a new voice from the communications array, the main display activated, showing the familiar figure of Maya Okafor, still smiling that terrifyingly cheerful smile. "I hope we're not interrupting anything important." Speaker Xerion made a sound like a deflating balloon. "Colony Administrator Okafor, how lovely to hear from you. We just wanted to check in and make sure everything was proceeding smoothly with our integration into the galactic community. We've received some wonderful partnership offers, and we want to make sure we're following proper protocols." Behind Maya, the command center was buzzing with activity. Humans worked at stations displaying real-time data from across multiple star systems. Trade negotiations, scientific collaborations, diplomatic exchanges, all happening simultaneously with the casual efficiency that was apparently the human default setting. "Everything is proceeding," Speaker Xerion managed. "Wonderful. Oh, and we wanted to give you advance notice. We're planning to establish another 12 colonies over the next 2 standard rotations. All the paperwork has been filed, of course. We've learned to submit everything 6 months in advance to give your committees plenty of time for review." The chamber was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop, if pins existed in a zero-gravity environment and made sound in a vacuum. 12 more colonies? Admiral Xixmoran croaked. "Well, 17 actually, but 5 of them are joint ventures with our new Xerion partners. Completely legal under the mutual development clauses of our trade agreement. Should be very efficient." That word again. Efficient. It was becoming the most terrifying word in the galactic vocabulary. "Maya," Speaker Xerion said carefully. "May I ask, what's your species' long-term goal? What are you trying to accomplish?" Maya's smile softened, becoming almost gentle. "Oh, that's easy. We want to be good neighbors. We want to contribute to galactic civilization. We want to learn from other species and share what we know. We want to help solve problems and make things better for everyone." She paused, then added with a slight grin. "And we want to do it all as efficiently as possible because life's too short to spend it sitting in committee meetings, arguing about whether a problem exists instead of fixing it." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. Finally, Counselor Vex-Talar spoke up. "They want to help solve problems. They want to make things better. They want to be efficient." Speaker Xerion nodded slowly. Yes, they do. Vermenti Pinks's return. This is a disaster." The Altarian delegate whispered. "If this becomes the new standard, if other species start expecting actual results from their governments, if efficiency becomes normal." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the chamber understood the implications. The humans hadn't just established colonies. They had accidentally demonstrated that most of galactic civilization had been operating on the principle that looking busy was more important than actually accomplishing anything. And they'd done it while being aggressively helpful, cheerfully legal, and devastatingly competent. "What do we do?" asked the Flixian delegate. Speaker Xerion was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of inevitable change. We adapt, we learn, and we try very, very hard not to get in their way while they fix things we didn't even know were broken. In the observer gallery, Admiral Vex-Talar looked at his biopad one more time. The reports kept coming in. Human colonies establishing trade routes, solving technical problems, mediating disputes, building things, fixing things, making things better. All of it legal, all of it efficient, all of it terrifyingly competent. He thought about Maya Okafor's smile, and Tom Bradley's casual discussion of orbital weapons platforms, and Lisa Park's 4-hour negotiation with the Xerion Syndicate. Then he thought about the 17 colonies that already existed, and the 17 more that were planned, and the partnerships and trade agreements and scientific collaborations that were spreading across the galaxy like some kind of beneficial plague. The humans weren't just establishing colonies. They were accidentally reforming galactic civilization by the simple expedient of actually reading the manual and following the directions. And the most terrifying part of all? They were succeeding. God help us all, Admiral Vex-Talar muttered, using a human expression he'd picked up from the intelligence reports. Then he closed his biopad, took a deep breath, and went to update his resume. If you can't beat them, join them. And if the humans were recruiting, well, at least his next job would probably be efficient.